Hello, and welcome to the Gotham Outsiders. This is a very special episode on toxic fandom. Angering Joker movie fans everywhere, I'm your host, Bat Obsessive Chris, and thinks the Schumacher movies are more fun than the Burton ones, my co-host TJ.
Hello, everyone. I am your Chris proclaimed Batman acolyte, and my voice just cracked.
With us to plunge the depths of toxic fandom is editorial lead at Adam Insider and feature editor at Screen Rant, Alisha Grauso.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yay.
Hi, we're so glad you could come. Wow, I ran across you as you fell afoul of some DC fans on Twitter.
Yeah, that's usually how that goes.
I mean, truly. So do you remember particularly what happened in that one? I was trying to even find it and couldn't.
Which one?
Okay.
I mean, I asked that seriously. It's been
No,
a lot
fair
in the
enough.
last week or so.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's been an ongoing thing for honestly years. So
Yeah.
When you say what things set them off, I there's a whole it's like you need to be a little bit more specific.
Honestly, that answers it really. I mean,
Yeah. So just a kind of a rundown is how it started is I'm not necessarily a fan of his movies. I don't think he was the right choice for DCEU. I can appreciate what he tried to do.
Yeah.
And I like some of what he did. I just don't think it all came together. And there are a lot of people that really like what he did, and that's totally cool. It's just, as a filmmaker, he just generally doesn't tend to appeal to me personally. You know what I mean? And that's fair. Like, I've gotten criticisms from some of his fans, like, well, you should be completely unbiased. And I'm like, well, I'm human. Like, I'm still human. I still have taste, you know, like,
right.
Like, so,
Right.
So a few years back, 4 years ago at this point, this would have been 2017. The thing that really got me on their radar was, and this was admittedly a joke in poor taste on my end, and it's something that I wouldn't make now, I don't think, just in general. But it was right after this interview of his had been making the rounds from like 2009.
Right.
It was before he was with the DCEU, and he was talking about how, you know, oh, Marvel's gonna be making Captain America and Thor, like, so cheesy. And he talked about how his superhero movies, if he ever got to do superhero movies or more superhero movies, they would be dark and gritty and realistic. And maybe his Batman, and this was in an interview, like, was something he actually said, maybe his, Batman would be sodomized in jail or Arkham Asylum. And so it was like the day after this quote was making the rounds again, and somebody said something about Suicide Squad or Birds of Prey. And I said, well, let's be glad that, you know, Snyder's not doing it. Otherwise, we probably have like a rape scene for funsies. And I quote, the next tweet was the context, like, hey, I'm not like making, like, this is a reference to a quote he actually made. Well, of course, that wasn't taken into context. So that tweet has been taken out of context and just thrown in my face since then. And then a whole bunch of other stuff happened. But basically, it was like, it's a very interesting fandom.
Yeah.
But the thing I've noticed, and the thing is that I've been doing this job for a long time now, and I've run into different toxic fandoms. I mean, I've even like made furries mad before because of a piece I wrote about Zootopia's marketing, and so it happens, you know. But although I will say the furries, extremely nice people.
Yes, they are.
As soon as I fixed what they were upset with, which it wasn't even not factual, they just thought it was misrepresented them.
I feel like I went silent for a minute there because my jaw hit the floor when you told me how basically innocent that tweet was that people got mad about.
Yeah. So yeah. So,
what? I mean, I'm not surprised, but I am surprised.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. Like, it's a very well, I think it was a few things conflated. It was not shortly, but a little bit after that. The thing is, with their fandom, There are a lot of toxic fandoms, and there are toxic portions of almost every fandom.
Absolutely.
You'll find it in every fandom. The thing with this one is that they seem to tend to have a much longer memory, and they do not let go of things. They just don't let things go. I've never had a fandom that has like taken tweets I've said out of context and screenshot them and saved them for like years and brought them up for years after the fact. After that there was a whole mess with a film critic who got swept up in the Me Too allegations, and rightfully so. And he'd made a lot of enemies, and understandably so. But what had happened was a lot of the people that he worked with and for that company that were basically, they were getting piled on and attacked, and they had nothing to do with it. You know, they had nothing to do with the company's decisions to keep this guy on and all this stuff. And I tweeted something. It was like, outraged Twitter doesn't believe in rehabilitation, only crucifixion. And I still feel that way. Not just with that, but with a number of other things. And people, the Snyder cult, took that as a whole thing, conflated it with the joke I'd made like a year or so ago, and it all got spun into today, which is I support rapists like Joss Whedon and that film critic. And it's a whole, like, it's insane. It's truly insane.
Oh my God.
The other day, somebody tagged me in a video saying I needed to apologize to Zack Snyder for saying mean things about him. And it wasn't even me in the video. With Joss Whedon, it was just another redhead with glasses.
No.
So it's been this whole thing. And granted, I don't always help myself. I have, and this is an excuse, but I have ADHD. It can make me very impulsive when I say things. And I will occasionally get, I'll get irritated and I'll pop off. And then in hindsight, I'm like, delete. So I haven't helped myself sometimes, but I will say that, again, this fandom looks for reasons to be offended. They deliberately take things out of context. After the whole Snyder Cut was greenlit, and a bunch of critics were rightfully concerned about, like, well, what message does this send? This emboldens them. And I made the comment, we don't negotiate with terrorists, which is a common saying.
Yes.
Like, that's a common saying. It doesn't mean actual literal like suicide bombing terrorists. It's a very it's just the mindset, the idea that you don't give in to people that have basically held something hostage or through demands or whatever. And that got taken out of context, and now they are upset because I call them it's a whole
oh my God.
So sorry to your listeners. That's a lot, but just kind of laying the groundwork for the background is that I have a long history with them. And the frustrating part is that even when I don't say anything, like, I will go for like months, if not like a year or so, without saying anything about Snyder. Like, I don't even really talk about Snyder, or I hadn't. And stuff like that, but it doesn't matter because it's like they follow me and have me on a list just to keep checking on things I say. And there have been tweets or things I've said that have nothing to do with them, that they'll dogpile on because they make a false equivalence. And so it's been frustrating because it's like, I would love to stop talking about this, guys. I would love to not be dogpiled by you. Like, just, you don't like me. Just stop reading my tweets. Like, just go away. But they won't. And so it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, there are a few of us they've had on their radars that they just particularly don't like. And it does not matter what we say, what we do, what we don't say, how long we go without saying something. It literally doesn't matter. So it's been a very interesting experience in the past few years because, again, even though I've run afoul or to a couple different fandoms, I mean, Gamergate, furries once, Star Wars fans, Comicsgate, all sorts of stuff, I've never had the experience with any of those fandoms the way I have with the Snyder cult.
Well, thank you for telling us all of that. I mean, it seems like this was a really
Sorry, it's a lot. Like it's a
No.
lot,
No.
lot to process. It's just when you were like, so how did this start? I was like, well,
yeah. See,
which year would you like me to cover?
yeah. I was aware of the stuff that had happened in the last few weeks. I wasn't aware that this was like a bit of a journey for you. So a little bit about if we have a mission statement as a podcast, we call ourselves the Gotham Outsiders for this reason. Like we want to become a space where non-toxic DC fandom can exist, where it's, you know, we're a queer feminist podcast. We're a place where we kind of, at least right now, while our fandom is pretty small, we try to keep it really peaceful, so far as we can control that part of it, right?
Yeah.
Because you know, I've been a DC fan since I was a teenager. It's been a journey finding any space that felt safe.
I wanted to say, like, I think it's really great that you can look back and say, like, oh, maybe I could have said this better, but like no matter what you say or do, like there's no reason for you to be treated like that.
Absolutely.
Like, for anyone to be treated like that.
Yeah. Oh, there's absolutely not. But for me, and this is the thing too, I think it feeds into a larger problem with just online toxicity in general. And
for sure.
Twitter especially, there's this weird idea that anybody with a blue check mark is elite.
Yeah.
And privileged, and they aren't human somehow.
Yeah.
And so I get a lot of comments like, oh, you're a blue check elite, talking about this cape shit was the term they use. And I'm like, okay.
Wow.
But yeah, but it's interesting. And I tried to explain this to somebody once. He was a kind of reasonable Snyder fan. And he was like, oh, you complain. I was like, okay, but think of it this way. I said, I am one critic. This was a thread. I rewatched Man of Steel. That's what it was. It was a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, something like that. And I tweeted a thread about it. And I wasn't even super critical because there was stuff that I complimented and stuff I quite liked. But my overall takeaway is that I don't think somebody that has the Randian philosophy that Zack Snyder does can inherently do Superman, because it stands in, you know, it's like diametrically opposed to everything that Superman stands for.
Absolutely.
And so oh my God, I got piled on for that. And one guy was, you know, he was like, well, you always, you know, you complain about being harassed or dogpiled. And I said, okay, well, I'm one person putting my thoughts out there, you know, which I thought through. I thought these were fairly balanced and reasonable thoughts. And you don't have to read them.
Yeah.
You're making the point to do this. I said, but when I do, I get 50 different responses back.
Yeah.
So people don't realize that when they pile on something, they're not tweeting in a bubble.
Yeah.
But they're only one person. But when you have 20, 50, 100 people all tweeting that way, it's a lot. It's a lot. And so that's part of it. I think that they don't fully get, because I do think sometimes quite a bit of that cult needs to unplug. I think there are a lot of really cool people that, you know, are DC fans and like Snyder's work, but there are a lot that really need to understand, like, to unplug themselves from that whole, like, it's a movie, like this should not define your life, you know?
Yeah.
And those seem to be the ones that just never let it go. Like but I will say this, I feel bad because a lot of the worst victims of theirs are other DC fans, not just film critics. And that's the thing that really sucks. So like, I feel really bad for the genuine, cool, like, you know, kind of level-headed, logical, you know, reasonable DC fans who are like, we love DC. I grew up with DC, or like, I don't even hate Snyder's movies, but it's hard to love it, you know, if you don't actively worship all of them. So it's just a very complicated, strange fandom. And I feel worse for the fans. So like you said, you're trying to make a safe space, and I feel bad because that's needed.
Yeah. It's definitely been an exhausting process. I mean, we created this space because we couldn't find it, right? I mean, if we had found it, I don't know if I would have been so driven to make a podcast. But it just wasn't there.
I think the people we're talking about are the vocal minority. Like,
Yes.
as on social media, maybe they're, I mean, I don't want to, I think DC fans as a whole, even if they're not on social media, like, they're probably pretty cool.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So when I say, I feel like, I should clarify. When I say it was hard to find safe spaces, it wasn't because there weren't people. It's that the spaces were always infiltrated with the toxic fandom too. Like, it wasn't like they were the majority. They just were everywhere that I could find.
Right.
Yeah. So
They're
I wanted
drowned out by the, like you said, the vocal majority or minority.
Absolutely. So I wanted to, one of our amazing friends of the show, Bronwyn, wrote in about this topic, and I wanted to read her thoughts, share it with you all, and kind of bounce off of this.
Okay.
So Bronwyn wrote about the Snyder Cut, for all its pluses and minuses, was at its heart two things: an exercise in extreme professional indulgence and a setting for a deep precedent, allowing fan involvement and crowdsourced entitlement in the creative process. While I believe that engaging with fans can be and is to a degree a good thing, allowing toxic, noisy people online to dictate decisions even appear to do so supports that behavior, and is a slippery slope down which slides the empowered audience over trained professional artists and creatives. It's not the only example either. The toxic sides of fandom tend to be loudest and or have their ears of the power brokers, as evidenced by the fact that we've had many Batman origin stories as blockbusters in the 30 years, but there are so many members of the Bat family that get left out, and we just see the same ones over and over again. So that was Bronwyn's thoughts. Do we have any responses?
So I'm at the place now where I'm glad the Snyder Cut exists. I'm glad, even if I'm not a fan of Zack Snyder's work, I'm glad he got to finish his vision. But at the same time, I'm a big believer in giving your audience not what they want, but like what they need type thing. And did I need this Justice League cut?
Did you need 4 more hours of Justice League?
Not really. And again, as Bronwyn was saying, and I think we've touched on, like, giving fans that type of power, I don't know what that's going to result in the future, because we're seeing the restore the Snyder Cut or the Snyderverse now. Yeah. And it's like, where is this going to lead? Because once you give in once, like, what's to say you won't do it again?
Absolutely. And who says they won't? I mean, it was pretty successful. I don't know that we're ever going to have a Snyderverse the way it was originally intended, but are we going to get more movies from him because of this? I think it's possible.
I do too.
You don't think
so? Maybe. I don't think it was as successful as people think it is. And that's something that fans don't, that's something with this fandom too. And not just this fandom, but all fandoms. A lot of fandoms operate, including this one, from a place of not understanding how the industry works, like at all. And so, the whole concept of them kind of complaining about Zack never got to finish his vision and it got meddled with, and that sucked, like it did. And the circumstances around it were tragic. And I do think Warner Brothers really screwed up there. I really do. But that's the studio system. Like, you don't see Sam Raimi complaining because Spider-Man 3 got butchered.
Right.
Because Spider-Man 3 was a completely different movie than the one he wanted to make. And he was forced by Sony, Avi Arad, basically, to shoehorn in Venom and other storylines. And that movie is largely considered like the worst of the 3 Spider-Man movies. It happens. And Snyder himself has gone on record by saying, they gave me notes and I ignored them. And studio notes, I ignored them. And I turned in half an hour runtime longer than they wanted. And it's like, okay, well then he wasn't helping himself.
Right.
Like, if you can't work within the studio system, don't work in the studio system. Yeah. And as for the success of the Snyder Cut, I think it's hard to say, because really the thing that they needed was signups. I don't think that if we had not been in a pandemic,
Yeah.
And if HBO Max had not gotten off to such a slow start, I really don't think it would have ever gotten greenlit. I think that they were over a barrel. And if anything, I think AT&T pushed Warner Brothers to make it.
That's a good point.
But I don't think we're going to actually know how successful it was until we see like subscription numbers or certain hard evidence or hard data. And I don't know that we'll ever see that because streaming platforms don't share that stuff.
Right.
By some metrics, it seemed to do well. Like people like, oh, the app saw a 62 or HBO Max app saw what is it, like 62% increase in downloads. But what was the download rate or download average number before? Like there's no context for that. There's no context for how much it actually cost. The final reported total has been around 70 million, which is a lot.
Right.
To redo a movie that already underperformed.
Right.
But so maybe it did well, but we know it didn't do as well as Wonder Woman 1984. It didn't do as well as Godzilla versus Kong.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say. Did it do well? Maybe.
Right.
Maybe it did. Did it do poorly? Possibly. The thing is, we just don't know. And so a lot of these numbers that the fan base is seizing upon is like, see, it's successful. It's like, yeah, but there's no context for that. Like there's no, like they were all crowing because 1.8 million people watched it in the first weekend.
Yeah.
But out of that 1.8 million, only a third actually finished it and watched the whole thing.
Understandable.
So that's a thing too. And so that's the thing, like, it's really hard to, like, even for film critics and entertainment journalists and those of us that do this stuff inside and out, it's really hard for us even to gauge like what success is when it comes to streaming platforms, because they don't report their numbers, they're not open about it. And they all have different criteria for reporting. I think what happened is, I think they tried to hype up this fan base and tap into it. Yeah. And too late, they realized, oh, this is a lot more toxic and aggressive than we realized, which is something that a lot of film critics had been saying for years.
Right.
And it's why a lot of us were upset when it got greenlit, because we were like, you just put a target on all of our backs that, have to cover this stuff. So
yeah,
I believe that I believe studios should meddle less. I believe in, a director's vision. But I also think if you're going to work in the studio system, then work in the studio system. Yeah. And just accept that sometimes things happen. Like they do,
It made me think about fan campaigns that haven't seemed as creepy to me. And I think about like shows that got canceled that had really passionate fans that would like, like Pushing Daisies.
Pushing Daisies was
right. And or even like ones like a smaller show like Timeless, that they got through a 2-hour movie to finish the show. A 2-hour TV movie, I guess I should say.
My mind goes to Shadowhunters, and like that was kind of intense, but it was not nearly to the level as the Snyder Cut.
Right. I feel like there is a way that this could be fine, because like I was thinking the Pushing Daisies, I think that was really charming. Like I don't think anyone got hurt by the Pushing Daisies fans.
It's the same with Winona Earp. The Winona Earp fandom has by and large been very positive, and they're very passionate. I mean, they're the reason that Winona Earp got a season 4. Like flat out, they did the billboard in Times Square, and even before the Snyder Cut was doing this, like they were having the billboards, and they rented stuff out in Times Square, and they had a whole fan campaign. But it was always coming from a place of love. And it was always coming from a place of, we love this show, we love these characters, we support this, rather than coming from a place of grievance, which is, it was the opposite. It was, we love this thing and want to see more of it, rather than you took this thing from us and we deserve it.
Right. Feeling entitled to it.
Yeah. And this is going to get me in trouble because I said something similar to this online, and of course it got taken out of context. But there is a lot of, again, not from the whole fan base, or not even most of the fan base, but that ultra obsessive toxic portion. There is a very similar overlap in the Venn diagram between how they operate and how the Trump MAGA world operates.
I was honestly thinking the same thing.
You said it, not me.
But I was thinking the same thing. I really was.
I said this online, and of course, somebody was like, "Oh, you're calling us that." I'm like, "No, I'm not saying that it's the same thing or even to the same degree, but there are certain patterns that are similar. The
delusional, obsessive,
worshiping of one man, who, and then people kind of like tie their entire identities to this one man." The air of grievance, and that you've taken things from us that we deserve and we demand.
Right.
The idea, the conspiracy theory, the kind of paranoid conspiracy theory that anything that happens, any development at all that's even remotely negative, it's an attack. You're trying to keep this man down.
Right.
Like when the first hour or so the Snyder Cut got accidentally uploaded in place of Tom and Jerry.
Right. I'd forgotten about that.
There was a whole thing that they were convinced that it was Warner Brothers trying to tank the movie and trying to ruin Zack Snyder. And I'm like, they literally spent $70 million for this thing to redo it after a year where their theaters were closed. Like, are you think about what you're saying? Like, they're not going to try to tank their own movie, so
flashback to actual Wonder Woman that people really were trying to tank beforehand by reviewing it before it came out. But Snyder was the one that's offended.
It's like, well, this happens a lot. Like, stuff gets leaked all the time, and so the thing is too, though, as I do think that it gave a number of people who were maybe lost or a little bit, kind of outsiders or awkward or whatever have you. They found this movement and it made them feel like they were part of something, and it made them feel like they were doing something positive, especially when they had the suicide prevention. They donated so much money to that, which was great. And it made them feel like they were part of something in a movement, which can be really great. The problem is that when you can no longer extract and separate your identity from that cause or that thing, that's when it becomes a problem. And so I think that's where I see kind of the overlapping similarities, not the same thing they're fighting for, not the same beliefs, but that idea, that mentality, I think, is the same in some ways.
For sure.
I just wish in general that fandoms in general could be a lot more positive. Right. I think it might be worse now because after the year we've all endured, like, people don't know how to be happy anymore. They don't know how to just enjoy stuff. Because I thought, okay, the Snyder Cup's coming out, maybe they'll be happy. I didn't think they would back off. I didn't think they'd stop. I thought that they would continue and like, okay, now they're going to want the rest of his movies to come out. But maybe they'll at least chill out a little bit about being so aggressive and hostile and like feeling persecuted all the time, because they got what they want. They won. They won. They should be happy. And I did not see that. I just saw the same aggrieved, persecuted, angry. Like, they were less concerned about being happy because this movie came out, and they were more concerned about still being angry at the people who didn't like it. And it's like, my God, just like, you won. You won.
And it seemed to validate. People were like, see, we were right all along. I saw someone on Twitter call it the give the mouse a cookie principle, where like, we've given them one thing and now it's like, great, more, please.
Yeah.
And I think we have to keep in mind in terms of what you're saying, Chris, like comparing this new version of Justice League to the Joss Whedon cut is like, look at the bare minimum that was done to make this better. And since I wasn't the first person to bring up Joss Whedon, I'm going to bring him up again.
Please.
The fact that people are now comparing Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon in a different way than they have been, and that like, look how awful Joss Whedon is, which fair, he's really awful,
but in a different way than they're saying at the moment.
They're using it to build Zack Snyder up almost to like, look how great he is in comparison to him. And like, what I saw someone say on Twitter, what you think Zack Snyder is what Joss Whedon is. And I
saw that tweet, and I was just like, because I think somebody tagged me into that, one of the whatever. But the thing is, it's like, you're exactly right. And part of it too is that I have a lot to say about this, but I'm not going to get into them as people. Whedon sucks.
Right. Yes. 100%.
I will say that Snyder seems to be, by all accounts, a really nice guy.
Yeah.
But he encouraged that fan base. He encouraged it. And he also, I don't see Snyder out there starting like diversity initiatives or programs to like get marginalized people, leg up in Hollywood. So like he's a really nice dude. I'm sure he's really great to work with. But like, please don't act like he's the savior of Hollywood. And
right. You put 3 people of color in your movie and suddenly you're the best thing that's ever happened.
Yeah. And I liked the Snyder Cut better than the theatrical version, which is kind of impossible not to.
Yeah. Agreed.
In the interest of full disclosure, I did half an edible before I watched it. So
that was such a good choice.
We did an hour and a half.
We think of that.
We did a drinking
half. That's a little fuzzy.
We did a drinking game, which I think helped, but we had to stop because we were gonna die.
Yeah, you didn't miss much.
I do remember. I mean, I definitely liked it better. I liked it more. That said, there was a really interesting phenomenon that I noticed among film critics, my fellow film critics, where a lot of them seem to write their review from a place of comparing it against the theatrical version,
right?
Yes.
Instead of reviewing it based on its own merits.
Yeah.
Because as a standalone movie, it's still not good.
It's a mess.
I feel like if it had had maybe an hour cut out, it actually would have been a really solid movie. It still would not have been my style. I don't like his washed out tones. I don't like the bleakness, but it would have been a legitimately good movie. Or, a much better one, a very solid one.
And that hour was the entire first hour, I think.
Yeah. And so the thing is, it was very interesting to me to see these reviewers. And part of it is they were comparing to this theatrical cut instead of, on its own merits. I do think all of the very, very sympathetic, pieces, like the Vanity Fair piece that had come out about Snyder, and then a lot of the bad stuff that come out about Whedon, it kind of predisposed film critics for wanting to root for him, which again that's fair, but shouldn't be something that colors your review. And also I know firsthand a number of critics that just weren't going to review it. They're like, I don't want to review it because it's still the same movie, it's still the same style, it's still the same director, or parts of it. Like, I already didn't like the trailer, I'm probably not going to like this. And even if I do like it much more, if I have any criticism at all of it, I'm going to get dogpiled and it's not worth it. And so I know a number of critics like just didn't bother writing about it, reviewing it, because it just wasn't worth it to them. So so it's a very interesting phenomenon where I feel like this is getting pumped up a lot more than maybe it would. Like if this had been the theatrical version, I don't think the reviews would have been as good.
No. Yeah, that was what surprised me right away, was that like Rotten Tomatoes score that kept climbing. And then I watched it and I was like, in what world? Like, but if the bar is the Joss Whedon movie, then sure. It crossed that bar.
Now, I will say that Warner Brothers gave a lot of the reviews to the very sympathetic like fan sites first. So I think some of those reviews were a bit artificially inflated.
Yep. That tracks.
Yeah. But it was really interesting seeing that come from professional critics where they wrote it from a place of comparison rather than on its own.
Right. And so you bring up how Snyder has contributed maybe passively to this, or maybe not passively. I guess we could discuss whether that's so. What do you see? And this, all three of us can talk about this. So you too, TJ, what do you see as creators' role in fighting against toxicity and or promoting positivity in the fandom?
Personally, I don't think it's necessarily the role of a creator to promote positivity. And but I do think it's their duty that once they're alerted to something, negativity and toxicity going on, to emphatically denounce it. And the thing with Snyder is I'm very sympathetic to him in some ways because one, he doesn't see the toxic part of it,
Right.
because all he sees is the worship. But two, he went through something unimaginably painful and hard and difficult, the hardest thing, you'll ever have to go through.
Yeah.
And I can understand why he can't denounce this fandom, why he can't bring himself to do it, because they got him through the hardest time of his life.
Yeah.
And they did donate to, a suicide prevention charity, which is great. It's not carte blanche to do whatever they want, which some of them use it that way, but it is really good. Yeah. And I understand why he maybe can't emotionally or mentally bring himself to acknowledge, like, oh, while I was getting all the support and love, they were also doing, really awful, toxic things to other people.
Yeah.
That said, there's a small cynical part of me that's like, but it's also very easy to ignore that stuff or conveniently ignore it when it's benefiting you.
Yeah.
And I finally got mad when he, I think it was that Vanity Fair piece that Anthony Bresnikan brought up to him, that toxicity. And he basically dismissed it and was like, oh, toxic? How can they be toxic? They donated to suicide charity. And it's like, bro, somebody can donate $100 to suicide prevention, then turn around and call like a critic, like the C word. And like it doesn't, and he immediately dismissed it. And for me, I would like to think that if I were in that position, it's tough being put on the spot, but once it's been brought up to your attention a couple of times, it's like, oh, okay, this isn't just a thing that's being made up. I should probably pay attention to this. And I think he did a good job with denouncing Geeks and Gamers on the premiere live stream he did. But at the same time, it's like, but you were doing a live stream at the premiere with some of the most toxic people on YouTube.
Yeah.
So you denounce Geeks and Gamers, but you were doing the live stream like with them. So
yeah.
It's very like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like you either denounce them whole, like all of it, or you're a part of it. And so,
I agree.
Yeah.
That's one of Chris's favorite phrases to use.
Which one?
You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Oh, I do say that a lot because creators try to do that all the time. We've talked about several writers who try to like comment on social issues, but while like explicitly in their comics doing the opposite, and you're just like, okay, well, yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking about the way I worded the question. I don't know that I think it's a responsibility of creators to create a positive space, but I do think that they can. And the one that comes to mind right away is the author Rick Riordan.
Yeah.
Who has he has become one of the biggest authors in the entire world, right? And he has used his power to promote positivity in his fans and to promote other writers and to discourage, the negativity, but he actively encourages the positivity too. Like fans will write him and be like, I read this character as queer, and he's like, I love that. Good. Do it. Like he actively promotes them treating each other better, and it seems to have made that fandom fairly non-toxic. So maybe it's not his responsibility, but the fact that he's doing that is making that a safe place for people.
I'd say same with Supernatural. It's the same thing. Like the Supernatural fandom is really interesting because it's so long, it was 15, 16 years. And it could be a little toxic at first, and they kind of rooted that out. And it became, and it was led from the top down by the head, the main three actors that were constantly doing charity work and reaching out to fans and building the SPN, the hashtag SPN family. And it was a real community that they built. That said, I don't know that I don't think Snyder would be particularly interested in building that kind of community, only because it's just not really his. I mean, look at all the movies he makes. That's not really. He's not he's not a, hey, let's sit in kumbaya and like hold hands and like have a positive experience. Like he doesn't, that's not his thing. And again, that's fine. Like, I don't think it should be on creators to have to build that space. My thing is, I draw the line is when you know that there's bad stuff going on within your space, then it's your job to root that out. If you have any sort of platform of following, and and I try to root that out on my platform. Like I'll see people being unnecessarily shitty to other people, like in the comments on a tweet, and I'm like, hey, knock it off. Like that's not, that's uncalled for.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, TJ? Do you think creators have this responsibility as well?
I kind of agree with Alicia, where like I don't expect creators, and in my mind, I'm thinking like authors because that's my main community I'm in on Twitter. Like some of them don't even have social media and aren't involved in their fandoms, and like that's fine. And I think if you're putting out good art, I think your art is going to promote positivity in and of itself, if that makes sense. And that's just if you're like a decent human being and you're producing quality art. Like I think the people that love it are going to create something really beautiful around it. But then at the same time, you can have that minority that maybe runs a bit too far, is a bit too aggressive. And I agree with Alicia that if once you're aware of that, I think you do have a moral obligation to denounce it, as she was saying.
What is your kind of perspective, both of you, on why toxic fandom goes so quickly from why do you hate this thing into sexism, racism, and homophobia thrown at the people that hate this thing?
Because white men.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Yeah. I mean, yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
like it or not, it's changing a lot, but it's really, if you think about it, it's really only changed pretty rapidly in the last decade.
Yeah.
Where decades before that, the geek space, if you will, was predominantly the realm of awkward, socially isolated, outcast, white guys, nerdy white guys. And a lot of that is still there. In that fandom. I think that so when it's suddenly, I think the MCU is the big progenitor of this, but suddenly pop culture isn't like, or geek culture isn't a niche culture anymore. It is just pop culture. Like comic books, nerdy stuff like that is pop culture now. It just is. It's ubiquitous. Everybody likes it. Or, not everybody, but it's, your high school jock that used to beat up the nerdy kid to like Spider-Man before is now a huge Spider-Man fan himself, and vice versa. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it too is it's the internet. I think that online, I think social media platforms have got to do a better job about cleaning up and policing their own and blah, 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 freedom of speech. You know what? Your constitutional rights are fine, because guess what? They're not saying anything about the government.
Right. Yes.
Your freedom of speech, your constitutional right to freedom of speech is not falling underneath the category of private company monitoring somebody or blocking them because they call women, they say women should be, staked and hung or something like that. The third thing I think is that loss of power, because so much geek culture and just culture in general is catered around the male experience.
Yeah.
The vast majority is still, these movies are still built around male actors, male characters, male themes. It's built around the whole idea of power and punching and kicking and fighting, as opposed to, like I like the end of Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange and Scott Derrickson fought for this. He's told me this in person. He fought for the end where Doctor Strange could resolve the end without having to physically fight.
Yeah.
Because you never saw that in movies, superhero stuff. And so a lot of this still has the very strong veneer of being quintessentially like, male, so to speak.
Right.
And so when, women and people of color and, queer and other communities come in and like, well, hey, we want stories about us too. It's that idea that because they're no longer being centered, they're worried that they're losing status and standing. And that was the only place, the only realm they had any sort of status or standing or felt like an authority at all. And so it's that whole like kind of, it's a larger thing. It's the whole white male grievance. And it's not just white men that are toxic in fandoms. Yeah. But the majority of it is. And I think it stems from a lot of what stories we do tell and have told in geek culture stories too, as well. Yeah, I agree. And again, mostly male fans. And I don't want to keep like harping like men, straight men, whatever.
You're in a safe space for that on this.
That's all we do.
No, it's not that. It's just I personally don't want to do it because I don't think that I think we need to address the fact that there are a lot of straight white men and other men, but mostly straight white men that are deeply broken in this country.
Yeah.
But also I don't want to like alienate ever.
Sure.
Because I don't think that's helpful. But I will say that there are way too many fanboys who view any display of like traditional alpha masculine power as badass, and badass always equals awesome, always equals good.
Right.
No matter, because they don't want to read beyond like the surface visual context. Right. To like actual narrative themes underneath. And I think that's a real problem.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because I feel like Marvel's been grappling for a very long time, even more so than the DCEU, because I think the DCEU has kind of always elevated their, especially in Snyder's world, as gods more than humans. Whereas the MCU has been grappling for quite some time with heroes screwing up. And you know, maybe that's one of the reasons why a lot of this toxic fandom can't ever admit wrong or criticize or anything like that, because it's not there in the movies either. These are these untouchable like demigods and deities that are so far above humanity that how can we possibly criticize them? Like they're on another level. With Bruce Wayne, he's filthy rich, he can do whatever he wants, because we also kind of weirdly put rich people on a pedestal in this country. And so I wonder if maybe that plays part of it too. Although the Marvel fandom can be super toxic as well. But it's just a very interesting way of just seeing like just the different approaches each studio has taken with laying out their superhero universe.
I'm a big believer in art educating people. So it makes me really sad that the people that aren't picking up on the text or the subtext here in Falcon and Winter Soldier specifically, like, not to get political, which I feel like we're already doing. So I'm going to go for it. These are the same people that are like, well, if you don't want to get shot and killed, don't break the law. And it's like the situation is more complicated than that. And as Alisha was saying, like, these are just people that haven't had to look beyond the surface. So like, you know, if we're trying to educate these people through art, this show, and this is the response we're getting, it's just really depressing.
It is. I think about this all the time with the movie Fight Club. Which is, I feel like maybe like the example, right, of a movie based on a book written by a gay man about the problems with toxic masculinity, that uses the term snowflake as a joke, right? Like it's supposed to be in there to make fun of toxic masculinity. And this movie and that phrase have been so co-opted by people who don't realize the book is making fun of them, like that it's supposed to be against them. And they've been like, yes, this book, like this movie, these people are who I want to be like. And the writer is sitting over there going, how did this happen? Like, do they not even know I'm gay? Like, what's happening here?
No. And you know, the thing is, I don't blame, but there are a number of movies I call them, or there's a spirit of a kind of movie that I call college dorm room poster movies.
Yes.
And they are all the movies that came out of the new wave auteur driven new wave of the 70s, new Hollywood, basically. And all of the filmmakers, all white male filmmakers that came after them, that emulated the 70s new Hollywood. And it's not to say that these movies aren't good or that you can't like them, but if those are the only movies you ever like, to me, that's a red flag.
Yes.
Like if I walked into a guy's place and only saw Tarantino, Scorsese, Finch, you know, like if I only saw Fight Club,
you're backing out of the room.
I'm like, oh, okay, you might be a decent guy, but you're a guy that has a lot of, you haven't really been tested a whole lot in your life in terms of thinking about other people and the world at large.
If you look around your room and that's your poster collection, could I recommend therapy?
This makes me think of I just rewatched Birds of Prey with my dad.
Yeah.
I've mentioned my dad before on this podcast. We're very different people. But
my dad and I too.
Yeah, he really enjoyed it. And then we immediately watched Suicide Squad afterwards. That's always a mistake. But in this scenario, his big takeaway after watching both of them was, well, Harley Quinn sure was sexier in Suicide Squad, wasn't she? And I was like, you missed the point. When the promotional pictures for Birds of Prey was coming out, we had the parts of the fandom being like, why does Harley not look hot? Blah, blah, blah. Her outfits are stupid. They're ugly. And it's like, no, she just looks like a human being.
Right. Ugh.
It's like, no, they're not ugly. They just don't show ass. That's your problem with it. That's it. That's your problem.
So we've talked about shows and films that fandom love that they're toxic about, but I wanted to bring up a show that I've seen fandom being toxic about if someone else likes it. Ooh. And that's with and I want your opinion on this, Alisha, with WandaVision. And you know, the big issue here is that I've seen in the fandom, in the Marvel fandom, is that Wanda was whitewashed in the MCU. And it's like, yes, that's a very valid criticism, and that's something that needs to be talked about. But we're at a point where there's like really extreme fans that are like harassing anyone that enjoys it and is like supporting it. And while I can understand like not wanting to be involved in that part of the fandom if you're not a fan, like it's really toxic. And it's hard for me to like, I'm in that fandom and I do enjoy WandaVision, but I do see the problems there. And like I think we're at a point in fandom where it's like people aren't grasping that you can enjoy something and also acknowledge that it has problems.
You're right. I think there needs to be so much greater diversity and representation and true inclusion, because it doesn't work to just throw up a person of color or a disabled person or a person, you know, queer person or whatever on screen and be like, good enough. Like, what kind of story are you telling? But there are some people that get extremely, like they have like I call them one issue fans.
Yes.
They're the same. They're like the fandom version of one issue voters or single issue voters. It's kind of the same thing as like some people in fandom where they get like this pet issue and they go hard on it. And that's all they see. Like that's all they judge a movie or film by, is if it doesn't meet this benchmark and this specific criteria, they don't want to watch it. They don't want to see it. It's bad. They dismiss it. Where I don't think that's helpful, because then I think we need to keep pushing creatives and filmmakers and writers and producers and everybody to be better with this and to evolve continually. But I also think we have to acknowledge how far things have come as well. And you have to acknowledge the good. You have to acknowledge the attempts, because you're not going to nail things every time, like especially when you're wading into these complex topics. But also the entire show, we got an entire Marvel show that was about a woman exploring her grief. What? like, hey, the next big Marvel thing after like Avengers Endgame is going to be 8 episodes of a woman being sad. Or 9 episodes. Like, who would have thought we would have gotten that ever? You know, and it's set to like old sitcoms. And so I agree, TJ, that can be very, I think sometimes, unfortunately, I try to remind myself that people's toxicity can sometimes come from a place of wanting to do good. And wanting to be more inclusive. So it comes from a good place, but it sometimes curdles and goes too far in the other direction, where it's like, okay, now you're starting to just be bullies and you're actually not helping your cause, because now you're just shutting down any avenue where it might get better and change, because now people are just gonna be afraid to do stuff at all, because, you know, they're gonna get dogpiled no matter what.
And I think on that, kind of related to that is and you said early on, the idea that we can like things that are problematic. Like we can do both. We can recognize this has problems and I can still like it for the good parts. I was thinking about Wonder Woman 84. Like that movie is a hot mess, but some people liked it. But if you said you liked it, people were like, oh, so you approve of this thing and that thing. And it's like, no, I just liked the parts that weren't those things. TJ's laughing because he always makes fun of me for liking that movie, but I do
support sleeping with someone in another person's body.
I do. What? I support body possession. Okay. I'm very pro body possession. That's what it God. A thing that can really happen. I
think it goes back to that thing we were all talking about, like, Chris, you and TJ, where we said it's nobody can really get like nuance anymore and complicated things. Where, for example, we were talking about Whedon earlier. I watched the Nevers pilot. I really liked it. I really enjoyed the Nevers pilot.
I want to watch it so bad.
I really enjoyed it. However, it was really weird to watch it. And I felt really uncomfortable the whole time because of knowing it was, now Whedon's not part of the series anymore. Like he left. So they did he directed the pilot, or no, he wrote the pilot and he directed the first 3 episodes, or the other way around, something like that. And then the first chunk is being released in 6 episodes, and then he left. And then they brought an entirely new showrunner, and she's doing like the second half of the first season, which is the second chunk of 6 episodes. So he's really not even involved anymore. But he is with this pilot and with like the concept of it. And so it was so weird to watch because of just knowing who's behind it. And the theme of it is very feminist. It's very like it's women's time to take power and men are going to try to press and hold them down. And it felt very much almost like it was him trying to be like, see, I'm not a bad like feminist. Like I really do support women. And it was such a weird feeling because I was like, man, if this had not been Whedon, I would really be enjoying this. I still really like this pilot. Like I'm really enjoying myself. And I feel really conflicted about that because I know who's behind this. And it's such a weird feeling, but I can say that, I can articulate that, where a lot of people I think are incapable of allowing themselves to like something if it's from somebody they don't support, which is fine. That's absolutely, like, I do not judge people that do not watch Woody Allen, movies or anything like that, or Roman Polanski. Good for you. Like, I support that. But I also don't think we should like harass and browbeat people who do watch them.
We've had real conversations on this show about how we were going to approach, because if you're doing the history of Batman comics, there's some authors in there that are not charming men.
Have you read some of their manifestos lately? They're not great.
There's some it takes us some dark places, and we had a real conversation about that before we read one that won't have come out by the time this episode does. So teaser, who could it be? But we had a conversation about like how do we cover, do we cover it, first of all? And we decided yes. Also, because we were like, these things are worth talking about, even if they are written by people that are problematic. And when we're talking about the nuance, you mentioned the pushback against broken characters, which I've definitely seen in sort of happening in 2 ways in a lot of fandom discussion lately, which is one, if I like this character, they must be perfect, right? Like, and you ignore the obvious flaws in that person because if they are a well-written character, they have them, right? And the other side of it being, if you don't like the character, then other people who like that character must be bad.
It's interesting too. And I wonder if that ties back to the fact that so many people now are incapable of separating their own identities from the things they like. So it's like, I like this character and I relate to this character. So any criticism of this character that I'm doing anything wrong is a criticism of me, where it's like, it's not. And you can criticize a character and still love them.
Yes. We're Batman fans. We make fun of him all the time. This is now a Falcon and Winter Soldier podcast, because I was going to say also, I saw a lot of people really like Zemo now, and that has a lot to do with the actor being charismatic. But if you say that online, people are like, "Oh, you like the war criminal?" And everyone's like, "Nobody's saying we like them. He's a war criminal. I just thought his dance was cute." Like, what?
It's like, okay, Loki stan.
Right, I know. Yeah, like, I'm looking directly at your Loki avatar right now, and I don't see your point.
Marvel does a really good job of like the very charming criminals.
Yeah. I love
villains, and then
I love that
anti-heroes, and then also in their last phase, they've done a very good job of like the criminal or the villains where you're like, he actually makes a really good point,
right?
Like,
yes,
he's going about it the wrong way, but like Killmonger wasn't wrong,
right?
He's going about it the wrong way, but yeah, Thanos, you're exactly right. We're probably gonna destroy our planet.
I'm just saying Zemo made some good points. That's what I'm saying. He's not wrong.
He's a murderer, but also like
exactly. But
absolute power corrupts absolutely. Kind of, yeah. So
I think that it's interesting because there is the slightly more relaxed side of fandom that can enjoy a villain and be like, I like this character, they're really interesting, without then going, I condone everything they do. But there is always that pushback of people being like, oh, you like them, so you condone everything they do, which is so strange to me.
Yeah.
Because were we not all in the Hannibal fandom before? I thought we all were. My bad. It must have just been me.
Yeah, it's very strange to me that the people that are like, oh, it's so weird that they made him like, oh, but he's just an anti-hero now. Like, everybody just loves him. And I'm like, again, I keep going back to like, were we not all like Loki? He literally like
he killed 80 million people. That's the joke.
Blueprint for that. Like the blueprint like, of being the charismatic villain. Like,
and if we're bringing this over into Batman, it's the Jason Todd, right?
Yes,
is he super violent? Yes. Would I want him to be super violent in reality? No. Do I love him with my entire heart and would, be like, protect him with my life? Yes, I would.
Yeah, I mean, I have always loved it's funny because people are like, oh, you're not a Batman fan, or like they're like, you don't like, I get crap from DC fans. Like, you're a Marvel fangirl, Marvel shill. I'm like, I grew up more with Marvel, and Marvel tends to be more my speed. Like, Spider-Man is my boy, like through and through. That is my character till death. But I like a lot of DC characters. I just happen to like literally everybody else in the Bat family more than Batman.
So do we.
Same.
We do.
For the love of God, as much as I like Robert Pattinson, do we really need another Batman movie? Can we please just get Nightwing already? Or Batgirl?
Robert Pattinson could have been Nightwing. He could have been.
Can we please just get Nightwing and Batgirl, or literally anybody else other than Batman already? Please.
Please. Looking in the camera and begging you to make Tim Drake a part of the movies.
Yeah. So it's a very, tying it all back to toxic fandom, it's a really interesting time because I think I see this growing more and more and more, where I feel like in one way the internet was great because it gave marginalized people the opportunity to find communities where they wouldn't have had it before. But I think now maybe the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction, where now it's almost like we're segregating ourselves too much.
Yeah.
Where it's like the point of the internet was to be able to integrate all of us and to get us to kind of like this, global openness and being able to connect and learn about other cultures. And that's true. But it's like we took all that information and went back to our own corners. Mm-hmm. And I see that in, fandom. I see that in the way people watch movies and are in consume entertainment now, is they want things to be very neatly defined, to fit into a very neat box, including themselves and how they feel about things. And that's just not life. It's just not life, Sometimes your movies don't get made. Sometimes they get changed. That's very sad. It happens. Yeah. Like, sometimes other people don't like the stuff you like. And that's okay too. Sometimes a character is going to do bad things. You can still like them, but recognize they've done bad things. Same. So it's just, it all kind of goes back to everybody really just needs to understand how to approach things with more complexity and nuance and open-mindedness now.
I always think of that one Onion article from at this point, probably 10 years ago, which is like, woman decides to take a break from being a feminist so she can enjoy a movie for once.
Yeah.
And I feel that. Yeah, right. Like I feel that even as someone who literally has a podcast about, feminist and queer reading of things, sometimes I do just want to just like, okay, but I'm gonna just like this movie for now. Thanks.
Yeah,
sometimes,
but it's like, yeah.
Sometimes you just have to take an edible and put on the Snyder.
You do. Sometimes you do.
Sometimes you do. So we had one more question from friend of the show, Shuri, SW Sondheimer on Twitter, who recently went viral and has run afoul of toxic fandom herself. But she wanted us to talk about what do we think makes certain fandoms more toxic than others. And we've kind of talked around this a little bit, but what happens that makes these places more toxic than others? So I feel like we need to shout out to our friendly rivals over at the Pink Milk podcast, because we have an ongoing debate about whether their fandom, Star Wars, or our fandom, DC, is more toxic. And we haven't decided. And honestly, it might just be both.
I will say personal experience, it's DC. But
take that, Pink Milk.
But
we love them.
I think part of it can be when the creators involved in it don't push back in any way or actively encourage it without realizing, which is what Zack Snyder did.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think he realized he was doing it at first, because I really don't think he saw the toxicity.
Yeah.
So, which makes sense, why would he? And so when people are like, oh, it's toxic, he's like, what? They're just tweeting about, they want it, like they're just tweeting at executives. And it's like, but that's not all they're doing. But that's what he saw.
Right.
I also think sometimes it's the content itself. Like, I think different types of content attract different types of people.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we don't talk enough about the type of content that people are being attracted to, or that they would like enough to like identify with. And there are a lot of themes in Snyder stuff that tend to attract the kind of, it's very male power fantasy. It's very nihilistic. It's very
toxic masculinity.
It is.
Yeah, it is. And like when I called him Randy, and his fans got offended and they were like, oh, Superman spends his entire movie in Man of Steel trying to do the right thing. I'm like,
does
yeah,
he?
Pa Kent. I'm like, yeah, but Pa Kent literally told him, like, maybe you should have let a bus full of kids drown.
Right.
Like,
he certainly doesn't in the way that he does in the comics.
Yeah. Like, he let himself die he looked to Sun Right Now, was like, I'm going to let myself die to prove a point. Like, about how humans can't handle you. Like,
right.
I don't trust humans. They're inherently awful. Like,
yeah,
that's like, I'm not talking about Superman. I'm talking about everybody around him. So
I'm not sure how much good Superman did in that movie, but I'll throw that grenade out there.
Yeah. So yeah, and like the gratuitous, like just building smashing violence, and so it was a lot. Like, anyway, but I think a lot of his themes tend to attract a certain type of person. That the other fandoms tend not to. So I think that's part of it too, that I think we have to look at the content that's fomenting this. I think Star Wars, it's a matter of that it's in some ways like the oldest fandom, like geek fandom, even though like DC and like Marvel comics, like those were around for much longer. Star Wars was really the thing that kind of kickstarted like the convention and like the Comic-Con and like the nerd, like the getting together with other like fans. Like, that was Star Wars that really started that. And that was all like outcast, ostracized white dudes. And so I think with Star Wars, it still goes back very much to that, where they're like, not my Star Wars, hashtag not my Star Wars, or not my Luke Skywalker. So I think there's a lot of different reasons, but I think a lot of it ties back to the content itself, where without intending, sometimes the wrong people take the wrong messages from it.
Yeah. I think that's really fair, because I think Snyder Bros are obviously like a condensed version of this, but it is true of DC fandom in the minority that is loud. We will keep hitting that point. It's not the majority of people, but DC fandom does have a loud, toxic minority, even outside of Snyder Bros, before Snyder Bros. probably that fed into and became Snyder Bros, if we're being honest. The people that shriek over the bat nipples and like, any sign of queerness in any of the comics, and they, clutch their pearls. Didn't mean to make that a Batman pun, but here we are. Thank you, TJ.
I thought you did it on purpose.
I didn't. They scatter their pearls down a crime alley. To end us on a much lighter note than the rest of the show has been, I wanted to ask you both, what is the silliest hill you will die on, fandom wise?
It's Spider-Man, capital S hyphen capital M.
Yes, I agree.
It's not Spider-Man, one word. It's not Spider-Man, one word. It's not Spider-Man with lowercase m. And also, it's Frankenstein's monster, not Frankenstein. Frankenstein is the scientist, and not the monster.
I agree.
Who's your favorite Spider-Man, Alisha?
Of the movies?
Yeah. That's my other question.
That's a tough one because the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies and Raimi Spider-Man movies mean a lot to me. They came at a really tough period of my life where I was going through like my first real bout of depression. And so those movies have kind of burned themselves into my heart. And also they were the first like big Spider-Man movies on screen. I love Andrew Garfield. I think he got the shaft.
Yeah.
I think Tom Holland is the first to pull together two sides of Spider-Man. Because I feel like a lot of people will say Tobey Maguire was the best Peter Parker. Andrew Garfield was the better Spider-Man. But I feel like Tom Holland pulls both of those together. And also like the kid is just so freaking charming. Like
yes, he is.
Just adorable. Like I love him that
so
kid
much.
so much. I think the Sam Raimi movies so far are the best movies. I think Spider-Man 2 is almost a perfect comic book like superhero movie. But then also I met Tobey Maguire and had an interview him and he was a jerk. So
that's well known. What I hear.
Yeah, it's well known. So,
I didn't know that, but then I haven't paid any attention to him ever.
Yeah, so but I can separate that from the movies. But I would say that probably like we're talking about like movies of my heart. Probably the Raimi movies are my favorites. But I think overall, I think Tom Holland's Spider-Man, I think he's the best at both. I just don't know that his movies are necessarily as standout yet.
Well, that was the correct answer. Congratulations.
Ding, ding, ding. TJ, don't think I forgot that you haven't answered my question.
I know. I was trying to distract you.
What's your stupid hill you would die on?
Dick's ass always has to be meaty. And I don't care if you think that's objectifying him.
It's a character trait.
That's not silly. That the Nightwing booty.
Yeah, that's
is legendary.
What would we do without it? We would die.
Maybe you think he doesn't get appreciated enough because of his ass, but like it still needs to be there, even if we're appreciating other aspects of him. That's my
other aspects of him.
Yeah, other aspects.
Imagine when he gets cast in real, like for a theatrical movie. Like that poor actor's gonna have to do so many squats.
Well, the poor guy on Titans, the minute he was cast, people were like, his ass is not sufficient. Do you remember that? People were really criticizing him.
Brenton Thwaites, yeah.
I
do remember that.
Very cute. I like him a lot.
I think he's cute too. Like part of my contract writer is we're gonna put the little padding, we're gonna put the foam rubber padding because I mean they all the suits get the foam rubber.
Just so much extra booty. There's got to be a booty out there worthy of Nightwing. That's what I'm declaring. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Alisha. And where can our listeners find you on social media if you want to be found? If not, that's fine too.
They know where they know already. So
no, but our listeners are cool. Let's actually, if you want some positive DC fans, you should get our listeners.
Fans, be cool. It is at Twitter is the easiest place to find me. It's Alisha Grauso, and since my name is weird, I will spell that. It's ALISHA GRAUSO. So you can find me there. I will post my writing there too. So from Screen Rant, from Adam Insider, and from anywhere else.
Excellent.